Kia kutahi, kia kaha, kia pakari. Te he Māori ora, no mai, haere mai, e ngā hau, e whawhanui. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Hello, and welcome to today's Spotlight webinar, coming to you today direct from our homes instead of the Spark Innovation Studio. I'm Monique Strawbridge, a product marketer within the Spark IoT team, and your host for today's webinar session. Now, I first met Janet, our webinar presenter, a few years ago through our work, and I'm absolutely thrilled that she's here with us today. Her passion for sharing how key technologies such as IoT, 5G, and AI, and how they can help cities work better for the people that live there is just undeniable. Morena, Janet, welcome.
Thanks, Monique.
I was so excited that this webinar was going to be an excuse to get you to Auckland and through our innovation studio, but alas, we're in level 3, so we'll make sure that happens in the near future, I guess.
Next time.
Yeah. So just before I let Janet take it away, we've just got a little bit of webinar housekeeping, particularly for those who haven't joined us before. So firstly, you're welcome to send in your questions to Janet during the webinar. Simply type in your question on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll get to those at the close of the presentation. And during this session, we'll also be running a poll. It'll be put up partway through, and we'd love you to respond to it. And also, just of note that this webinar is being recorded, and it will be available to you at its conclusion. Now, to formally introduce Janet and do justice to her achievements could take quite some time, so here's a wee trimmed down version. Janet McBull is currently Director of New Zealand Smart Cities Council, Australia, New Zealand, as well as Associate Director of the AI Institute for University of Waikato. Her initial career was in the financial services industry, leading mid to large scale technology adoption initiatives, including releasing New Zealand's first online origination system for finance. Following that, Janet spent more than a decade in the vocational education sector. And more recently, she's been involved with supporting digital inclusion and enablement initiatives in the Waikato, including as Smart Cities Advisor to Hamilton City Council and Tech Sector Lead at Te Waka Waikato Regional Economic Development Agency. So Janet, over to you.
I think I'm on mute. I don't know how that happened. No. Thanks for that, Monique. Salam and hello, everybody. I just wanted to also add some other relevant roles that may be of interest that sort of talk to the fact that I'm just not making this up on the spot. I'm also on the executive committee of the Artificial Intelligence Researchers Association. I'm on the executive council member at New Zealand IoT Alliance. I'm a trustee at Web Access Waikato Trust, which is that digital inclusion piece, and I'm also now more recently on the advisory board of the Waikato Wellbeing Project, and I'll touch on that. As for Smart Cities Council, we've been around since 2012, and I mean the stats indicate that with our partners and with other advisors and everyone that's involved, because our approach is quite collaborative, we've generated $2.7 trillion in annual revenue and contributed to more than 11,000 smart cities projects. So this is in terms of our partner network. We've just come out of Digital Twin Week last week as well. Our key focus areas for Australia, New Zealand, and actually even globally is the Smart Cities Academy around professional development, the future of place, what does that look like, bringing technology, data, and local government planners, community together. And recently, we've also picked up a key focus around data, which I'll talk a little bit about. And normally we have Smart Cities Week as well, and I'll refer to that. But there's loads of content on our website. If you're ever really interested in most of what I'm going to talk about today, you'll find on our website, smartcitiescouncil.com. It's a new version which only became live a couple of weeks ago. So we're just still propagating the content and pulling it across from the old sites. And actually, we've got an event on Monday where we're celebrating 5 years in Australia and New Zealand, as well as having Oricon as our first partner for ANZ. But I know you're all not here to hear all about that. You're here to think about the topic, smart cities of the future, leveraging IoT, 5G, and AI. there's quite a bit to go through, so I'm not going to run through what the menu looks like, but this is what Spark and I had talked about that I would be covering. It's not necessarily in exactly this order either, so just be aware of that. And at any time, if you sort of have questions and want to ask something specific, put it in the chat, like Monique said, and I'm always available anyway if you want to sort of catch up, and the website, like I said, is a good resource as well. So let's just start with thinking about smart. I quite like taking people back to this whole concept of smart city and where it came from, and get people thinking. And this is something that I want you to, part of what I want you to think about during this presentation. So when I looked up the definition of smart, and I've done this before for other presentations, this is what it talks about. And specifically think about the SMART in terms of SMART as an acronym for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely goals. So think about this as we're going through this presentation. But as a concept, apparently IBM coined, if you can call it, the smart cities concept back in 2008. And then basically from 2009, it just took off. There's a little bit of history there. The next slide talks about, for more from a New Zealand context and an Australian context, because that's what we're talking about. But even generally, when we talk about smart city, we are talking about towns and regions as well. So it's actually where people are, and we're talking, and from a Smart Cities Council perspective, and loads of other definitions that you can find around smart city. It talks about technology, data, and innovation, and they're the three areas that we talk about when we talk about smart cities as Smart Cities Council ANZ. But it isn't just often people think that this is a new concept, and so I said 2008 for IBM. But if you think about it, and you can see in the image there, traffic lights. So traffic lights as a technology have been around for a number of years, and I think that I read somewhere, actually, you know, if you think about what happened in terms of infrastructure in the past, so aqueducts in Rome, and you know, New York street grid with the tunnels and the London subways, and you know, there's myriads of other examples. I think if we started calling more recent developments in cities smart, I think those other people would be quite offended. So the concept has been around for quite a while. And it doesn't necessarily mean also that it's been aligned with the evolution of technology. And that's a really important point when I talk later about this being a journey. So if you think about, you know, when the invention of steam, it took nearly, well, actually just power and power after the engine was invented, it took 60 years for it to be uptaken. The elevators as well, like, as a concept. So it took a number of years after they were actually invented to actually become part of our infrastructure in our cities. And then there's electricity itself. So in terms of the full impact of electricity, that took a while. So think about technology over the years and what a smart city is, going back to that original that definition. And then even in more recent years, I mean, I talked about Rome and I talked about New York and the tunnels and London. But even if you think of, I remember I had a look somewhere around in the 1970s around Los Angeles, talking about big data projects back in the 70s, like the middle of the 70s. And you know, everyone knows AI has been around for a number of years. You've seen all the movies about it. But what has changed, I guess, or is evolving, is people. So the population of cities and the size of the planet isn't changing. It's, you know, if anything, it's getting smaller, you could say. So the stats indicate, and I talked about this a number of years ago as well. So it's interesting that it's still quite a relevant stat, that by 2030, the population of cities around the world with a population of more than 10 million will be 43. We'll go to 43 cities. And by 2050, up to 70% of the world's population will be living in cities. And to just sort of think about what that looks like, you know, in 1900, there was only 14% of the world's population that lived in cities. So this is, and then there's also the proliferation of networks and the fact that there's loads more data, and there's the sharing economy, and people are more connected. And then also think about these people and the fact, like the population of a city, and the fact that the distribution of all of that is not actually even as well. So there's quite a lot of inequality. And so I guess the concept of smart and the concept of leveraging technology, data, and innovation for a smart city becomes a whole lot more relevant as the population grows and as we evolve and move forward. The next slide is going to talk about that the aim of smart cities, even so I touched on the fact that it's about technology, data, and innovation, but the aim of smart cities in the sense of looking at outcomes and outcomes for people has also been relatively the same over a number of years. And so at the Smart Cities Council, we talk about livability, workability, and sustainability, and I'll go into those in a bit more detail later. But just again, think to the definition of smart and the fact that this is not a new idea. So this concept of it being a journey is quite important to keep in mind. Just having problems with my monitor here now, which is annoying. With my monitor, my mouse. Here we go. So what we're talking about is a smart city strategy. Sorry about that. It was just my mouse was playing up. So in terms of livability, workability, and sustainability, and the smart city strategy being about a journey, livability, you have to think about the fact that livability means different things to different people. So depending on who you're talking about in terms of a quality of life. But we talk about also the relationship that people have with local government. So in terms of that relationship between smart council and smart community. We talk a lot about the workability being about economic advantage, but it's also now about where people work, and so workability in the sense of the future of work, and place being about accommodating the future of work. And in terms of innovation as well, supporting economic gain and economic prosperity in terms of the everyone again, if you go back to the livable concept. And equality in that sense of livability and what livability means to different people, I already mentioned, but there's a concept of equality again. And then sustainability. So sustainability in the sense of being able to, finite resources. So being able to make the most of the resources that we have, thinking about technology as there'll always be new technology. So how do we make the most of the opportunity? How do we work through collaboration so that we're not reinventing wheels? And there are a lot of other sort of concepts there around infrastructure and sustainable infrastructure as well. So there's a number of realms to sustainability, and of course there's the SDGs that most people know about. And so the Smart Cities Council work is largely focused and underpinned by the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Again, I'm having problems with my mouse for some reason. Always have a technical problem. Those that know me will know that I always have a technical problem when I have a presentation. And I always tell people, and incidentally, I probably should mention that right now, that I'm actually not really a tech person. So I'm not going to actually talk about these technologies in a considerable amount of detail. I vaguely know what they are, but this is less about the technology for all the peeps online now, and more about, how do we leverage this for smart cities. So I first started talking about the Internet of Things back in 2017. And so, in devices talking to each other and collecting data, and devices talking to us and us talking to devices is an interesting concept as well. But all of that requires connectivity. And so there's a number of network options there as well. But the one that we're going to focus on today, or talk about today or refer to today, is 5G. So this is the one that's promising lower latency, more data, or enabling more data and at a faster pace. And there are a few elements that relate to 5G and IoT that will actually the coming together of the IoT and the 5G that will be even further enabled by AI. So this is why these three elements of a smart city are quite nice as a little package. And I know that just recently, actually, and Monique has mentioned that I actually haven't been to the innovation centre at Wynyard Quarter, but I will. I feel like it's a failure on my part in terms of a smart cities person. But I read actually that Spark has partnered with Nokia to establish a goal of having 90% of us connected by 2023. So that's going to be cool. Artificial intelligence. So This is the definition that we use at the Artificial Intelligence Institute at the University of Waikato. There are many other definitions, and you can talk about natural intelligence and all the other terminology, but this is the one that we liked, and it's quite topical here, as I mentioned, related to IoT and 5G, because you can translate the data component as being enabled by IoT, and you can translate the compute power, although not in a pure sense, because compute happens in a system. But in terms of 5G and the power of 5G and the promise of 5G in terms of compute power or the ability to compute, and the fact that AI is really just data, algorithms, and computing power. And so and there are faults, there are positives and negatives to AI. So, for example, the energy use of running algorithms and that compute power. And so it's good to see that there's a number of areas of research that are relevant to the smart cities ecosystem that are going on around the world, obviously, but also in New Zealand. There are a number of universities that are working on research that will be important for the smart cities movement here in New Zealand. And it's nice that it's come together in terms of a voice for the AI research ecosystem through that association that I mentioned, the Artificial Intelligence Researchers Association, that's due to be launched, that has membership from across all 8 universities and the CRIs. And I think at the last count, there was like 315 members. So there's a real opportunity to pull these 3 components together, IoT, 5G, and AI, and really make it about New Zealand and the context of New Zealand when we look at the connectivity, and we look at inequality and people, and what does livability, workability, and sustainability mean from a people and planet perspective here. I think it's really important that we connect that research piece with everything else that's going on. And I know there are leaps and bounds being made in this space overseas, where the 3 things are coming together as a key focus around research. So one of the areas that obviously the AI Institute peeps and all the other researchers work, like I mentioned, in a number of things related to smart cities, but one of the key ones is the energy efficiency one. So I know the researchers that work with the AI Institute are looking at how an algorithm can run more efficiency and use less compute. There's also AI on the edge. So of course, if it can run more efficiently, then it can run on the edge. And so this piece around the relevance of the connectivity to AI is really amplified at the edge. So the ability for the device to run compute on itself, make decisions there based on models, using data, talk to other machines, enable a whole lot more to happen in the place that it needs to happen, instead of things needing to come back to a cloud. And all of that's now going to be possible, and increasingly more so because of the coming together of these 3 components. So, and that is the extent of my technical ability there.
Hi, Jen. Oh, it's worked. I was just going to suggest maybe using the keyboard.
That's what I was going to say. Cool. It was being a bit funny.
Nice.
So this one here, so I quite like this statement, and I'm a big believer in people sort of, I was talking to Namibia, a council in Namibia 2 weeks ago, because I reached out to her a couple of years ago around a talk that I was giving in Sydney at Smart Cities Week, and we just stayed in touch. Anyway, she was talking about how there was so much to do, and in the last 2 or 3 years, she felt like she hadn't even made progress, and she didn't know where to start. And how did we do it in New Zealand? How are we doing it in Australia? And she's actually going to come back to me after the conversation that we had to sort of see how she's progressed. But what I said to her was, and I say this to everyone, and a number of people, most people understand this as well, is that you've got to think of its application. So the application of those 3 things that I talked about, and at Smart Cities Council, like I said, we talk about livability, workability, and sustainability. And I said to her about the smart cities concept being an approach, so not to try and boil the ocean in one go and trying to do everything all at once. It's not a point in time achievement, tick box, move on, we've got a smart city. So I talked to her about thinking about the impact on citizens, and that services and what was going on in the city that impacted citizens more, and to talk to citizens about that, and then actually focus in on some key deliverables, and then to co-create. So it was really interesting. And so I when I was developing the presentation, then I quite like this quote. So there are a number of examples of use cases, obviously, around IoT. So, I mean, again, you can look on our website and you can just Google this whole concept in terms of the application of IoT and 5G and AI in New Zealand. But I'll run through some examples. So in Wellington recently, for example, they're putting up a number of, I don't know if anyone knows about Blind Square, which is an app that that the visually impaired can use to navigate around a city. So Greater Wellington's installing a number of beacons. So it's actually driven by beacons around the Cuba, I think it's Cuba Mall, the area, to enable that app using Bluetooth and GPS technology. Then there's air quality sensors, and so that's another example of, and I'm trying to give examples of things that you probably might not have heard of because they're not always in the mainstream media. So schools measuring the quality of air quality, and that will be even more prevalent now in terms of picking up COVID. I think I've read somewhere that you can actually also potentially monitor the environment for COVID. I don't know. And then think about other applications in the sense of there's more traditional like smart cities around the infrastructure and the assets, and smart council and the services you provide, and having them on demand for citizens. But think about things that are that you wouldn't assume straight away as being something around smart cities. So one of them is around art, and a city in America using this whole concept of IoT to help people engage with art and in public places. And I can think of a local example, Lee Timu Timu and the team at Arataki Systems, where they actually use it's probably a bespoke proximity tech solution, but what they do is they use an app, and the offering is around cultural trails, and so it's around storytelling about and authentic storytelling, I think, is the key thing there around places of cultural significance in New Zealand. So, there's things around health, there's things around safety, like Safe Swim in Auckland. There's the navigation of the, supporting the visually impaired to navigate. Then there are also the concepts around how do people consume information. So even if you're going to think of the data from IoT triggering devices, being pulled into other systems, used in apps, using that to, provide information and insights to people. You also have to think about the bigger picture in terms of where people consume information and how they consume information. And quite like the idea of Wellington City Council, where they've put big screens in the libraries, and all of the sensor networks that are picking up data across the city, you can visualize that in these big screens. And then not only can you just move through that as a citizen, as a person in the community, just to see, and the fact that it's at a library, is the public, you can just move through that, through a recorded sort of a playback video, but also you can zoom in and you can think of things that are more relevant to you. And Sean talks about the fact that being personalizing or really tailoring the experience so you can actually engage the community even more. So, for example, I've seen his one with 3D goggles I've tried in his office around the sea level rise and the impact of sea level rise and what that would look like. So imagine all of that on steroids when you get to 5G. So and I don't think, I mean, I know it's in Hamilton, but I think my phone's not 5G, or it might be. But we can see use cases in the innovation, the Wynyard Quarter innovation precinct that Spark has developed, where there's a smart bench that also monitors the environment, but you can plug stuff into. There's the smart lighting that also does a whole number of other things. There's all the other technology that really would enable this concept of autonomous vehicles. So 5G is here, and it's here to stay for quite a while. So and it's basically going to put IoT on steroids. And the interesting concept here is, though, that it requires a whole lot more infrastructure. And so there's a book, and I couldn't remember the name of the book, but I'll see if I can dig it out, around the ugly city. It's something to do with the ugly city and infrastructure. And so with 5G, although there's the potential for it to support the monitoring of traffic and better managing traffic flow, and in terms of smart parking and monitoring the usage of the infrastructure and the assets that the city is providing, so you can predict demand and better manage delivery of those services. You can do the street lights, like I mentioned, all of that sort of stuff, and the ability to have edge analytics so that you're doing more on the edge. You've also got to think about the fact that the way that the 5G network works is actually there's quite a lot of infrastructure to put in place as well. So we've got to think about the design of infrastructure when it comes to so the use cases need to be considering yes, there's a use case, but what infrastructure investment does that require, and what would that look like? And then there's the AI, the ideas around AI itself. So what you can do on the edge and what you can do on AI is pretty much limitless. Again, it requires the data, the models, and the compute power. 5G, again, we'll put that on steroids. Real-time analytics is a key focus of the AI Institute. So actually being able to stream data and run analytics on data on the fly, so you no longer have to store data. They're also looking at concept drift. They're looking at continual learning. There's talk about adaptive systems. And I remember at Smart Cities Week in 2019, someone mentioned that if there's autonomous vehicles, why can't there be autonomous buildings? And not obviously in the sense of mere buildings moving, but in the sense of the buildings really being and I talked about this a couple of years ago in the sense of on a podcast actually for Spark, in the sense of the city being software. So if you think of that infrastructure comment to do with 5G, the use cases need to think about where do these nodes and where does the hardware sit, and then the use cases around IoT and further enabled by 5G on enabled through like being on steroids. And then the analytics, I think of that as the city being software and everything happening sort of behind the scenes and enabling the livability, workability, and sustainability. And a simple use case of that, the smart parking technology CTO John Hurd and I had him speak at an event a few years ago, and we were just laughing and at the time, and he was really serious, and it's probably very close to happening. I know that Spark's got some smart parking technology happening in Auckland. Is this concept of getting in your car, it navigating you to where you want to go. It already knows what meetings you have. Then it senses where there's a parking spot. Then it looks at what else is around there between you and that parking spot. Then it looks at traffic flow and stuff and guides you to the parking spot and gets you to your meeting on time, and all of that happening behind the scenes. In the same way, at the moment, the current infrastructure, which is not technology enabled, is the fabric of the city. Obviously, there's the idea of the energy efficiency as well. So the use cases around mentioning the better able to predict and monitor usage, so that it can be more energy efficient. In terms of waste, I know that the innovation precinct has this concept of smart bins that can tell you when the bin is full as well, which means you can better manage the movement of people, so the garbage collection routes and the use of resources. And then in terms of urban planning, so that's all sort of more physical, but what about the use cases that are more around what I would call smart council, so the internal part of council. And I know that Wellington City Council is doing quite a lot in this space. So there are you could use machine learning, for example, to look at historical records, so to crunch information at a much faster pace and in much more I guess depth than a human could. So in order to be able to have more of a informed approach to city planning. There's the programs that the cities could roll out in terms of alerts and safety and warnings, and if you think about earthquake monitoring and other sort of physical trauma that can impact a city or people, and being able to monitor that in real time and with more efficiency. And then there's just simple things like at Wellington City Council, Sean talks about the fact that the rules of the city, so the city laws, have already been written in code in machine executable format, so that actually it can support the workforce. So people talk about the future of work and the jobs, and he talks about the fact that, and we talk about at the AI Institute as well, about AI being about augmented intelligence, so adding to what a human's already I guess capable of, not necessarily replacing a human. So, and I think that's a really interesting concept for people to think about in terms of use cases. So there were sort of a few examples, but I wanted to take people now to sort of a bigger picture around what's happening around the world, and then what's happening in New Zealand. So the Smart Cities Council has offices in Europe, India, Southeast Asia, North America, and then Australia, New Zealand. And I remember a mayor that came across from, I think it was Seat Pleasant, which is in Maryland in the US, and he was such a captivating speaker. And he talked about actually Seat Pleasant being the world's first small smart city. So there's the concept of smart city, and he talked about the world's smallest, or the first small smart city. And he talked about the fact that whether it's 5G, whether it's AI, whether it's IoT, whatever the technology is, his focus was specifically on a journey, and it was about a citizen-centric smart city, and so focusing again on the people. And so in North America, there are a number of examples around that whole connection between people and technology. And then what does that mean for smart? Everybody knows about Sidewalk Labs in Toronto, and there are other things going on as well in Europe and Rome. They're trialing a number of AI applications at the moment, and one of them is involving neural networks, where they're combining the information around. So a person going to a parking spot, they're combining the information around what else is going on. So who's getting on and off the bus, how many people are where, where's the bus going next, as well as part of a moving object, where's all the other traffic. And then it's feeding all of that information together, and then creating the right set of information for the right stakeholder to enable a more effective approach to pedestrian safety. And so putting, again, the person at the center. In the Middle East, there's Smart Dubai. So that launched in 2014. And it's quite ambitious. They want to be the happiest city on earth, is their simple vision. The happiest city on earth. So I mean, they've got resources up the wazoo, and I guess money up the wazoo. So I guess they could do almost anything. But they talk about some key areas. So a smart economy, smart living, smart governance, which is that sort of smart council concept, smart environment, smart people, and smart mobility. In China, we all know about, or most of us will know about, rather, I assume that it's all, but know about the surveillance of people. And in terms of the AI space, China's really going to be the leader in AI globally. So there's quite a lot going on there. Taiwan is interesting because it's got 62 indicators on this wheel in New Taipei City, in terms of what smart means, and it's on this smart city wheel. And again, they've broken it down into categories like Dubai, which is government, mobility, economy, environment, smart living, and smart people. So they're very similar, in fact, to what the Middle East is doing. A couple of years ago, I talked about leapfrogging, and it's still very relevant today. And when I was talking to my colleague, or the person in Namibia, it was even more evident. With some of the stuff that she was telling me about happening and going on, and looking to go on in Africa. So I talked about the fact that we have to live with the existing infrastructure and what's already around us in our cities, and this whole historical concept of a city, and the footprint, and the planning, and the zones, and everything. Whereas over in the developing world, they can pretty much start from scratch. So you can read about cities in India, in Africa, where there is nothing there. And in China, we've seen the example of the hospital that came out of nowhere after COVID. And that, I guess, is leapfrogging the developed countries. So something to sort of watch there. In Australia, in India in 2014, they announced the 10 billion pounds, I think it was, a scheme called 100 Smart Cities, and they were also going to rejuvenate 500 existing cities. And 5G, they've got a high, actually, same as Africa, actually, they've got a high usage of mobile phones there, but their coverage, I don't think it's much their coverage, I think it's their download and upload speed isn't quite there. So they're really hanging on for, apparently it's going to start there, the 5G, in the second half of 2021. So with one of the companies there. And so imagine what that will do for that country if it's got the second largest smartphone market in the world. Imagine what 5G is going to enable there. And in Australia, closer to home, and I'm actually Australian, so we had Smart Cities Week in 2019, and we had it in 2020 as well. Unfortunately, 2020 it went online, and 2021 we just canned it, so it'll come back in 2022 because it was better. It's better in person. We noticed this shift from so 5 years in the region. So over that time into 2019, we noticed this shift from smart cities, and this was obviously helped by the fact that the government put out pots of millions of dollars for cities to actually apply for in terms of projects. I think it was like 28 million the first time and then 21 million the second. So an investment like that in New Zealand would just catapult the use cases if we had the right approach and the right this concept of smart right in terms of what it means for New Zealand. So all of these examples that I'm talking about are different parts of the world. We need to really contextualize it to New Zealand. But there was examples I remember of garbage trucks, and much of this is happening in this country as well. I know examples of this one using dash cams and so machine vision on rubbish trucks to actually look at the condition of footpaths and look at the condition of roadways and feed that information back in terms of being proactive around maintenance. The city of Canterbury, Bankstown, and I quite like Patrice Donovan there. They talk about the fact that whether it's technology, it's like rolling out toys, but what we need to be thinking is around listening to the residents and being really transparent. And Lend Lease was the one that talked about the autonomous buildings as well. So in 2022 and 2020, sorry, the Smart Cities Awards, we were focused more on so there's that movement of looking at smart from a technology and data perspective into the innovation space. And so now we were seeing more, the Smart Cities Awards that we run every year, we looked at examples of privacy frameworks and data leadership and what smart meant in different places. So the future of place. So what does that look like? So it's no longer just your traditional city. So I remember one of the councils won because of a concept around smart beach. And the city of Casey, if you get time, have a look at what they're doing around impact and citizens as well. And Canterbury Bankstown, actually, just the other day was identified as the #1 most innovative company in terms of government, education, and not-profit by the Australian Financial Review. So have a little wee look at what they're doing. Brisbane's hosting the Olympics in, pretty sure it's like 2032 or something. So they're already ramping up their whole their whole concept of smart and what does that look like to have this culmination of the world. Hopefully, if we're able to travel by then. Descend on Brisbane, and what does that look like to include everyone, and what does that look like for the existing infrastructure, and what does it look like to enable the games, and what does it also look like to not be a point in time idea, but actually be part of the journey of Brisbane. More recently, there's I could go on for ages around all the use cases to do with IoT that's being enabled by 5G and AI. But the important concept here is that there's a number of things going on in this country as well. So I talk about a number of examples globally. And now Monique has got a little poll for us.
Yeah, sorry about that. I probably jumped up a little bit too early, but I just wanted to let the audience know that it's the poll is just about what's put up now. So just on the right-hand side next to the question tab, and we'll leave that up and look at the results at the end of the presentation. The question we've got for you today is, which New Zealand city is ranked the highest in the 50 smart city governments in the world? So there are 3 options there, so you can select whether it's Hamilton, Wellington, or Christchurch. Thank you. Back to you, Janet.
Cool. So lots of things happening in New Zealand. So we've talked about some global examples, but what also is relevant is that all the applications of technology, data, and innovation that are also happening in this country, there's a large movement in terms of approaches that is happening globally that also is happening here. So it will reach us in sort of different pieces. But more recently, the World Economic Forum has looked at smart cities and citizens and what does that mean in terms of the globe and a connected world. And they've released a number of documents, and they've actually set up also the IoT, the World Economic Forum Trustworthy Coalition on IoT. So it's part of the Future of the Connected World initiative. So have a look at that. And so that's about the IoT and all the other pieces of technology and what that looks like for people. In terms of Bloomberg, they've recently released an initiative around investing $43 million in helping cities develop creative solutions for better results for people again. So in a New Zealand context, it's really interesting in the fact that all the stuff that's happening obviously in Auckland and that I've already talked about, and there's other examples across the country. But the Bloomberg one I mention is because Bloomberg Cities Network has launched the 2021 Global Mayor's Challenge, I think it's called. And 2 cities from New Zealand are in that, including Auckland, but also Wellington. So Wellington being so small, and Sean talks about them being at the edge of a mountain range that then falls into the ocean, I've heard him say before, and this high concentration of people. They're looking at using digital twins to help people engage with this concept, or engage and understand and engage with the move to be like, what does a post carbon future look like? And so the point being that there's tons of stuff happening globally. There's heaps of stuff happening here, and what we need to do is connect that in around what else is happening globally, not just in the technology and data space, but in terms of the innovation space, and be having those conversations, and vice versa. I know that a number of our city leaders in this country and our tech sector as well are having great conversations and being called on globally to provide their thoughts and thought leadership and examples and advice in the smart cities space. So that connection between the world and New Zealand is quite important. Hamilton itself, I can't have a presentation without talking about Hamilton. So I was the Smart Cities advisor for a couple of years, and it wasn't just me. Obviously, I was like the tail end of a team there. But we talked about smart society. So Richard Briggs was really big on smart society and what it looked like to involve everyone in that conversation, and what it meant to be truly smart, and what smart really meant. So going back to that definition. And actually, there's an edX course that's for free that the University of Canterbury, who was Smart Cities Council's first knowledge and research partner globally, in fact, and we co-teach or co-facilitate an MBA with them. And we've just actually come out of an intensive weekend with their MBA, which is a collaboration between Christchurch NZ. The sprint was, sorry, the intensive weekends, Christchurch NZ, Christchurch City Council, the University of Canterbury and Smart Cities Council, where they're looking at how they can use technology and data to help locals find out about and participate in local tourism attractions. But coming back to so what they did, Chris Vass at the time. So if you're interested on the edX platform, I think it's edx.com. There's a course that actually you can take, and it's a video shot of what cities around the country were doing back in 2019, and Hamilton's part of that conversation. So have a look at that if you get a chance, or if you're interested. I guess is probably the more the conversation. So in terms of that approach globally, the World Economic Forum, what the Bloomberg cities and that whole network is doing, and there are a lot of other examples that I haven't even mentioned. And then obviously there's what Smart Cities Council talks about and does. The ecosystem in New Zealand is primed for smart cities right now. So there's a lot going on. Probably many of you probably don't know about it, but just and this is going to come at 100 miles an hour. But there's the construction sector transformation plan was launched in January. There's the draft infrastructure strategy, New Zealand infrastructure strategy. There's the work that the Smart Cities Council are doing with all the councils around the country now being members, and what does that look like as an opportunity for smart cities. There's the New Zealand digital twin that's being developed in collaboration with a number of stakeholders. The digital twin challenge is underway. The Waikato Wellbeing Project is looking at tech and data as well as a number of other things in terms of SDGs to do with wellbeing. The Aotearoa Digital Strategy discussion document was released for consultation recently. We're putting together a submission in collaboration with ALGAM from a local government perspective. There's a new survey out in terms of AI from Curious. The Digital Technologies Industry Transformation Plan has identified AI as an enabler for New Zealand, and data-driven innovation as a key focus pillar. There's the work going on around developing a full national pipe data portal. There's the Aotearoa AI strategy will be out for a second round of consultation next year. There's a local government reform. There's everything that's happening with Three Waters. There's the digital identity trust framework is out for consultation. So there's quite a lot going on, and across other sectors that is relevant. So in terms of the wider ecosystem, but also across other sectors in this country that I think we just need to be really aware of. Number of drivers, number of challenges. I'm going to go a bit over, Monique, if that's all right. Like if I keep going.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
Cool.
Cool.
So drivers, challenges, and opportunities. So we talked about livability, workability, sustainability. We talked about people. There's a huge conversation going on at the moment around the report I mentioned from the World Economic Forum. The two reports is talking about what we really need to be doing in the IoT space. There's a number of governance gaps that it's identified. So they talked to about a number of experts from around the country, and the big ones that are coming up are safety and security, privacy and trust. And we talk about at Smart Cities Council around yes, there's the connectivity and there's all the devices and all the data, but we also talk about the fact that data needs to be interoperable and that we need to consider the security and privacy of that data. And so Neighbourlytics, for example, which is one of our Smart Cities Council members, doesn't use personal information or what we would call private information. It uses publicly available information to support to measuring what people are thinking of or how they're feeling in terms of urban life. And so location data is one of the key elements that they actually use, and so looking to other types of data is and conducting a privacy assessment before you actually go off and do things. With 5G, there's the challenge of, like I said, the layout of the city and where all the devices are, and does the city in the end actually look quite ugly because of all the little bits and pieces? And there's also the fact that you need use cases that are consider the way that the technology works. And then to add on AI, there are positives and negatives with every technology, and so you need to consider that there's an opportunity that's presented in terms of data. There's civic data trusts as a concept, so looking at how this concept of data from a personal perspective in terms of places and cities and how we feel about that, and what do we do around governance of that. In terms of AI and data in general, we need greater education so that people can come on that journey with us. So that data literacy, and I heard recently I heard this new term called privacy literacy as well. And then thinking about the future of place, and so where does this culmination of technology, data, and smart cities, where does it come together in terms of place, like where are people and where is smart cities? So the all important why we've talked about. The why is the livable, workable, sustainable, for people and planet, is to keep it really simple. The who is the everyone. So if I haven't said it enough already, the who is the everyone, and the fact that I think education is going to be a key component of that. Half the world's population isn't even connected, and that's the same in New Zealand. It's not the same stats, obviously, but it isn't good. I don't know if people have heard about what's happening with the schools going online and the impact that that's having actually on many young people around the country, let alone the adults that are trying to connect to services. And so the important thing though with the who is that you can be diverse in terms of engagement, and you can provide those opportunities around the education and that participation, and you can talk about equity and what that looks like. But inclusion is quite an important element. So inclusion is not about come and work on this with me and let's co-create. It's around, and we talk about this concept of a table, but it's around, can they access I read this somewhere, can they access the table? Can they get to the table as well, like not just be at the table? Are the benefits of that conversation and the contribution people make, is that reciprocation there? Is it fair? Are they comfortable being there? Do they feel that they have a voice? Are they being heard? So yes, they've said something, but is there an acknowledgement and that reciprocation again? And are they likely to come back in the future? Because that's the type of inclusive innovation we need as a country and we need as a world in terms of the smart cities and obviously in a number of other areas. And then it's around making impact. So that workable, livable, workable, sustainable, and the SDGs. So the World Economic Forum talks about, the report that I talked about, the Global Action Plan, talks about increasing education, improving security, driving positive impact, combating inequity, and strengthening collaboration. So the collaboration one's interesting in the sense of the investment of the next slide, time, effort, and money. So it doesn't have to be all done by one council or one group or just the tech sector. It's a form, let's collaborate. So Melbourne, for example, released it was in 2018, this opportunity for anyone from around the world really to engage with this idea of what would they do with IoT and 5G, and they've recently released something similar. So that wide, like throwing the net out wide in terms of collaboration. Coming back to the concept of what smart means, so investing your time, effort, and money around what smart really means, and actually around measuring. So the smart being in terms of those specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely goals, and remembering that it's an approach. So, and technology will always, I mean, it's not going to come and go. I mean, some of it will, but we're always going to be evolving. So at the University of Texas in Austin, they've already set up a research center for 6G. So think about that. And I don't know. And the investment doesn't have to come necessarily from the private sector. Public-private partnerships from the public or the private sector. Investment could come from government in many countries around the world. And I talked about Australia. The investment has come from government. So, but just think about the who, the why. Sorry, the why, the who, and the impact that you're wanting to have and need to have. And before I say a quick thank you, it's not the Jetsons. It's not, I watched that cartoon and smart cities are already here. We're not going to be waiting for that. Is the new term hyper-connected cities? I don't know, but I quite like the definition of smart and how that sits. And one of our members, Arcadis, I like the way that he sums it all up in terms of, there's that whole conversation about people and taking everybody on the journey with you, and equity and inclusion and diversity and all of that in terms of the people concept and looking at people and planet. But James sums it up as a smart city being about that's designed and it's wired and it's built to evolve as humans change and create an environment for ongoing innovation. And the only thing that I would add to that is it has to be inclusive innovation. And thank you.
Oh, thank you, Janet. I think we can all agree that smarter cities can really create some huge citizen community and local economic benefits. And it's great to see that New Zealand's taking some steps in the right direction, with being the first nation to have all of its local councils sign up to the Smart City Council, because I think what will really help drive us forward and get the outcomes that we talk about is that collaboration. And just so we'll just quickly jump to the poll results. We're just a little tight on time, so we'll see how that. The question was, what New Zealand city is ranked the highest in 50 smart city governments in the world? The results of the poll had it at Wellington, Hamilton, and then Christchurch. And the actual answer is Hamilton. So Hamilton's ranked 21st currently, with Wellington at 33rd and Christchurch 43rd. So we've got a few questions there. So I will just jump into these if that's okay, Janet, for you.
Yep.
So the first one here is from Tony, and he asked, do you think trend of decentralization from city living that appears to be one trend coming out of COVID will impact the 2030 stat of city living and the implications of this?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I was thinking that because I was going to actually mention that there was and don't get, like, I get a lot of my content just from what else is going on. I'm involved in obviously a number of things, and so I get a lot of the content from what else is going on around the world, and in New Zealand. And so one of the things that Sean talked about in a recent presentation that he gave was this concept of people being able to, and I touched on it around the future of work and where people are basing themselves. And so that it just then makes you think that if they can work somewhere, and that 5G will enable that even more, they actually will want everything else they want around them in that same space. So for example, he talks about working at the foot of a mountain in Taranaki, or somewhere close to there. And so you want the rest of the infrastructure. You want to take everything that you're used to in the city with you. So I think that's a really important thing to watch. And I'm looking for some stats and things on that. But there isn't any at the moment because I think it's a bit early to say. But in New Zealand itself, there's a huge gap to sort out in terms of infrastructure in rural communities. And so the hope is that 5G will support a lot of that and will leapfrog the fact that the current technology and the current networks don't work and jump straight into 5G. So yeah, really good point. I like that one. I'll actually do research.
Cool. And another question that we've got is from Nikki, and it was also one I probably wanted to ask you as well. And I think we talk a lot about collaboration between councils and private and public partnerships. But what sort of roles, like people roles, do you see that really need to come together to make this happen faster for New Zealand? Who ideally needs to be working together?
So I think the people are there. So Richard Briggs, for example, who used to be the CEO of HCC, was on the construction sector accord. So he was the CEO of HCC. He was representing local government, and it was actually local government having a seat at the table in other sectors. And so I think it's not necessarily roles, it's that cross-section movement. So I think the people are there, we're just not connecting them. So one example is I spoke at Spatial and Surveys conference recently about spatial finance and sustainable finance, and New Zealand has been the first country in the world now that's, I think it's mandating or looking to mandate climate-related disclosures for companies. So first in the world. So the ability to do that in a more effective way is going to require data about impact in terms of climate and the impact of the company's operations. And so we need the people that are in the spatial industry, so local government and developing spatial plans, to be talking to the finance ecosystem. So it's less I think around roles within a council or roles within in businesses. So if you think about the tech sector, industry, local government, central government, and other sectors, so industry in the sense of finance and tourism and that. And so it's the coming together, I think, we talk about it in an academic sense of that multidisciplinary or transdisciplinary approach. And so that comes together through collaboration so if there was a goal and there was a clear, so at Smart Cities Council, we've got this readiness guide, and the readiness guide pushes councils, which are normally leading the way in terms of smart cities, pushes councils to think about the table and who's at the table, and then not forgetting obviously that key component of people, the general populace being at the table. And Ada Lovelace Institute released a report recently that was relevant to this whole conversation around data and privacy, literacy, and equity, and mentioned that New Zealand apparently is doing quite well in this space of ensuring the Indigenous voice at that table as well.
Yeah, I agree. We've probably we won't get to all the questions. I'm sorry. There was just one quick one, maybe from Sham, that had a high number of votes, and it said Singapore is said to be leading the way in smart cities. What do you think they're doing different to others to achieve this?
Singapore's a very different beast. 5 million people in a concentrated space. The infrastructure is there. The government works in a very different way to New Zealand. The cameras are already there. Citizens are used to being monitored. I know at the AI Institute, we're talking to AI Singapore about some of the stuff they're doing with businesses and to build talent. But that conversation around citizens and engagement and what smart means in a space like that and for a population like that, and the Singapore being a mishmash of so many cultures, but also the gateway to Asia and things like the huge sort of focus there on fintech and other industries. I mean, New Zealand's a very different beast. So I go back to my comment. I stand by that. We need to make it about New Zealand. We need to make it about research in New Zealand being leveraged to support livable, workable, sustainable cities, and we need to do collaboration.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, that's all we have time for. So I'd really like to thank our speaker, Janet, for being so generous with your time. We appreciate it's not just this hour, but there's the time that goes into preparing a presentation like this. So thank you so much. And as I mentioned, we're broadcasting today from our homes instead of the Spark Innovation Studio, which gives a great showcase of the IoT, 5G, and mobile edge compute and other emerging techs that you can sort of get your hands on. So we'd love all of you to come through the studio once our alert levels allow. So if you're interested, please email us at innovationstudio@spark.co.nz. And just as a wrap up, I'd also like to thank you all for joining us online today. Remember to check out our website spark.co.nz/IoT/webinar to see what other ones we have coming up. And there will be a recorded one of this one there too. From me
Thank
and the
you,
Spark
everybody.
Innovation
Thanks,
Studio,
Monique.
thank you. From me and the Spark Innovation Studio team, kia kaha, kia mai, kia manawa nui.